I have to tell you that this video is sped up quite considerably because the whole project took me about 2 hours to make. So I'm working on a 16 by 20 canvas. This is a gallery wrapped canvas. And the background will be composed of black and white gesso. I'm going to be working wet on wet to create some nice gradient of these two non-colors. And the original idea was to have a dark background with some stenciling in bright bold colors and then adding 3D flowers over top of that. And that didn't happen. You'll see in the next step as I'm taking the catalyst tool to add some more white gesso. Somehow buildings started appearing and there was no way I could stick to my original idea. This was already down and I had to go for it. So I'm just reshaping, and what you're not seeing is me grabbing the heat tool once in a while to dry a little bit and then using the catalyst tool to drag the gesso to create some interesting texture and to shape the buildings. Now, one thing that I regret not knowing what I was doing from the beginning is working the sky and the water, because the ground is not the ground, it's water. So had I known that it was going to be sky and water in advance, I would have taken more time to create some shadows and highlights without having the buildings in the way. And now you're going to see me going over the top of the buildings because there was no way I was able to create a seamless sky without going over. And it's okay. I mean, I took the catalyst tool again and I reshaped the buildings, adding some as well. And that was a much better process. So far, I've only been using black and white gesso, and now I'm going to be adding some colors to create lights in the buildings. I have phthalo turquoise, teal, quinacridone magenta, diarylite yellow, and fluorescent magenta. These are all golden paints. And I'm going to be using 3 stencils from Donna Downey Studios. The first one is the mini alphabet rerun. Then I'll be using numbers, repetitive, and grunge halftone dots. And I'm using 2 pieces of copy paper to mask the buildings that are adjacent to the area where I'm working in. And I'm using a makeup sponge to add the colors. And I'm just going at it randomly and adding the colors as I go. You're not going to see the whole process because otherwise this video would have been even longer. But I've also taken good care in leaving some of the buildings untouched just so that the eyes could have a rest. Otherwise it would have been very, very busy. And here's what it looks like after I'm done the stenciling. Now there's a lot of color on there, so I'm gonna let that dry and I'll be working on the water and a bit on the sky at the same time. I have to tell you that I have worked on the water quite a bit to get it to where I wanted it to look like. I also wanted to have a bit of color, a spot of white, not too much color, because I'm going to be adding a quote on the water. And I also considered putting in some of the lights reflected in the water, but I felt that that would have taken away too much from the quote. So there's a fine line between too little and too much. So you're going to see me working at it quite a bit. The one thing I knew I wanted to add in the darker sections where it's mostly black, I wanted to work some of the phthalo turquoise and the magenta in there. It gives a nice subtle color. It's tough to discern on film or even on photos, but in real life they are there. Like these two colors are very present, but in a very subtle way. So I'm letting the water dry while I'm adding finally the shadows and the highlights with the catalyst tool. So again, it's black and white gesso, nothing else. And I have to tell you, I really love working with the straight edge catalyst tool. It fits very nicely in the palm of my hand, and there are 2 sides to it. So there's a narrow side and a larger side. And as you can see, I was able to paint the buildings with it and then do the shadows and highlights. So when I have a tool that is so versatile, I use it. I love that. And of course, with the shadows more than with the highlights, the buildings really come to life. It gives some nice depth to the whole thing, and that also helps push some of the buildings in the background. And that's a fun process for me. All right, so I'm adding more color and using a dry brush or an almost dry brush to work them in with some of the black gesso. I'm also going to be adding a big blob of white because, as you can see, there's quite a bit of white on the buildings. So I needed to reflect that in the water as well. The only thing that I'll be reflecting in the water are the antennas, and that was done on purpose. I needed some kind of vertical element, but in a subtle way so that it can be seen behind the quote, just so that the water has a little bit more visual interest. I'm also adding some final touches to the sky, and I have to tell you, this was a rough thing to do because I have the buildings in the way, but I made it work. So work to the wise. If you know what you're doing in advance, do your background first, not after. Okay, so time for the quote. I'm going to be adding it with light molding paste, and the stencil is called Intention, again by Donna Downey Studios. And so this is the first coat. I ended up adding 2 coats of the paste just because I wanted it to really stand out. And by the way, I did not waste any paste. I know that I'm adding it on quite thickly, but I was able to scrape most of it and put it back in the jar. So this is the second coat after the first one was dry, and it really helped. Like, that thing stands out really well, except for the word live, but you'll see how I manage that later on. Here's what I mean by scraping off the rest. As you can see, I'm able to grab most of it, so no waste. All right, this is the black aquarellable Stabilo pencil. This is going to help me bring out the word live to the foreground because it was kind of lost in a building. And this is a perfect example of why I didn't want to add the lights reflected in the water, because the whole quote would have been lost. At least I only had to deal with the word live, and that was done with the black pencil. It really stands out. Here's the final product. I'm very happy with this canvas. I did it totally as a treat to myself, and I hope that you've enjoyed this project. Thank you so much for watching, and I guess I will see you later. Bye.